Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Remember the Ladies, an event held in honor of Women's History Month. Today, we come together to celebrate the incredible women who have made a lasting impact on Fredericksburg's history. Through shared stories, expert insights, and personal reflections, we will highlight those whose contributions have shaped our community and historic sites we cherish. It is vital to recognize that much of what we love about Fredericksburg, the heritage, landmarks, and culture, were built by these women. While we shine a light on some well-known figures, we must also remember the countless unnamed women whose legacies continue to influence us today. By telling their stories, we honor their impact on our community and the history that surrounds us. Speaking of amazing women, I am pleased to introduce today's moderator, Milena Henderson, accomplished author and expert in historical fiction. Milena has written a historical novel and over a dozen plays, 2 of which she's won first-place awards for. She's also contributed her expertise to many historical institutions in Fredericksburg. You may have seen her when you visit them. She's also the founder of Somewhere in Time Productions, Inc., a performing arts company producing 5 plays this spring. We are thrilled to have her guide today's discussion. Please join me in welcoming Milena Henderson.
Thank you, Lindsay, for that wonderful introduction. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Women History Month presentation of Remember the Ladies. I will introduce our distinguished panel in a moment, but first I want to open with a few words about Abigail Adams. While searching the internet to craft my introduction, I came across the DAR website. There was a quote I found that I felt was apropos for this occasion. I quote, "At the beginning of the American Revolution, the structure of marriage and family was equal to that of a dictatorship and comparable to the relationship between the American colonists and the British Crown. King George III was viewed as the domineering husband and parent, and the colonies were the abused wife or offspring given no choice but to rebel," end quote. Abigail and John Adams were very close and often wrote letters to one another during the war. In this short excerpt from her letter, we can see that she expressed herself freely to her husband, who valued her ideas and opinions. Her letter, dated March 31st, 1776, included the happenings of the Revolutionary War, her life on the home front, and political ideas. She penned her impassioned plea for him and men in positions of influence to, I quote, "remember the ladies and be more generous than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power in the hands of husbands. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. If particular attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation," end quote. Clearly, Abigail Adams was declaring that women of the new nation desire the same liberties for themselves that George Washington and the Continental Congress took up arms against Britain to obtain for themselves. I think she was advocating for women to have the franchise. All right, so today we have a distinguished panel of executives from the most prestigious museums in Fredericksburg. Michelle Hamilton, manager of the Mary Washington House of Washington Heritage Museums. Allison Ellis, Director of Education of the George Washington Foundation. Heather Matthews, Office, Store, and Membership Manager of the James Monroe Museum. Dr. Susan Martis, Assistant Director and Curator of Belmont Gary Melcher's Home and Studio. And Dr. Gayla Sims, Curator of African American History and Vice President of Programs and Interpretation of the Fredericksburg Area Museum. All right, so first we'll have Michelle Hamilton of the Mary Washington House to speak.
Without a dedicated team of women, there would not be a monument to Mary Washington, and the Mary Washington House would be nothing more than a distant memory, and I would be out of a job. Since the 1770s, Mary Ball Washington, the mother of George Washington, was an active member of Fredericksburg in the community. She had family that lived in town. She attended church at St. George's Episcopal Church. She died in her home and was buried near Meditation Rock. Fredericksburg residents passed down to the next generation anecdotes about Mary Washington, Some of the few clues we have about her personality. They remembered a strong-willed but kind woman. Memories are one thing, but the residents wanted a physical monument. There were two locations, the house in which she lived and the outcropping of rocks where she prayed and is possibly buried. Early visitors to Meditation Rock decried that there was no marker or memorial to Mary Washington. In the 1820s, the first attempt to erect a monument was spearheaded by George Washington Custis. Even by then, the memory of where Mary Washington had been buried was beginning to be forgotten. George Washington Custis was the adopted grandson of George Washington, which elicited some inter-family arguments over who had the right to claim Mary's body. That idea of building a monument in the 1820s kind of floundered. It would take to the 1830s when Silas E. Burroughs, a wealthy New Yorker, offered to construct a monument. But the monument was started. There was even a cornerstone raising in which President Andrew Jackson attended, but due to financial difficulties and the possible death of the stonemason, the monument was started, but was left unfinished. The unfinished monument stood as an eyesore. It survived the Civil War, but it was pockmarked with bullet holes, and the area kind of became notorious as a lover's lane. It took the threat that the land would be sold at auction by a later owner of the Kimball property to spur action from a group of wealthy and patriotic women in 1889. The media coverage of the proposed auction outraged Margaret Hetzel. From her home in Fairfax, Virginia, her summer home, she lived primarily in Washington, D.C. Hetzel wrote an impassioned plea to the Washington Post. In her letter, she proposed the founding of a Mary Washington Fund to construct a monument. The Washington Post printed her article and actually wrote an editorial saying that they agreed. But there was one problem. Right after this letter was published, the Jonestown flood occurred. But Hetzel was not going to allow the coverage of the Jonestown disaster to have people forget that they needed to do a monument. Within days, Hetzel assembled a group of Washington, D.C. society matrons, and they formed the National Mary Washington Association. With Margaret Hetzel at the helm, it led a writing campaign to raise awareness, and the search for funds began. The ladies from Fredericksburg joined the efforts of the National Association and formed the Fredericksburg Mary Washington Monument. Rather than being at odds, the Fredericksburg and the National Associations worked in tandem. The Washington Post was a major contributor and helped raise funds, but regional chapters were established across the country. Through their hard work, the deed for the property was handed over to the Fredericksburg Mary Washington Association. After getting the deed, the real hard work of raising the funds to build the monument began. And this is where the newly formed Daughters of the American Revolution will enter the story. And I am a daughter. Came to the assistance of the National Association. Founded in 1890, so a year after the National Association for the Mary Washington Monument, founded in 1890 by Eugenia Washington, a direct descendant of Mary Washington, Mary Dacia, and Ellen Hardin Walworth. One of the DER's first resolutions was to do what we can towards completing the monument to the memory of Mary Washington. In fact, for years until the mid-20th century, Mary Washington was featured on the certificate you got when you joined the DER. Through the appeals of the DER, money began to be collected to complete the monument. At the same time, the Mary Washington House was saved. Since Mary Washington's death in 1789, the house had been occupied and remodeled to reflect the needs of the various tenants. In 1891, the house was threatened by sale and demolition. The plan was to purchase the house, dismantle the structure, and have it shipped to Chicago to be displayed at the World's Columbian Exposition. Mr. and Mrs. Beale, Mr. Beale was the son of Jane Howson Beale. They were renting the house, contacted the Association for the Preservation of Virginia Antiquities. And this is where this woman, Isabel Lamont Stewart Ryan, comes into the story. She was the first president of the APVA, the Association for the Preservation of Virginia Antiquities. Mr. and Mrs. Beale contacted the APVA with the knowledge that the Mary Washington House was threatened. The APVA had been formed the year before to protect Jamestown. So they came to the rescue. A fourth of the $4,000 needed to buy the house was contributed by this woman, Isabel Lamont Stewart Ryan. She was born in 1847 to a wealthy plantation family that they received money in tobacco. And she was involved in a variety of charitable endeavors, primarily in the Richmond area. But she, out of her personal funds, she contributed majority of the money. Without the aid of Mrs. Beale, Isabel Ryan, and the APVA, the Mary Washington House would nothing probably be an empty lot, and again, I would be out of a job. While the Mary Washington House was being saved, the founding for the Mary Washington Monument continued. Throughout the early 1890s, the regional chapters of the National Association held lectures, tea parties, and pageants to raise money for the monument. And this goes, and in all, they will raise $11,500, which is closer today to about $169,000, some change in 2 cents. Marion Harlan was another important person, and I rely a lot on her work. She visited Fredericksburg and interviewed residents about Mary Washington for a biography, which she included, which is some of the best information we get on Mary's personality. Marion Harlan traveled the country lecturing on Mary Washington and sold copies of her book to raise funds for the monument. All their hard work finally paid off, and the Mary Washington Monument was dedicated on May 10, 1894. During the formal dedications ceremonies, the Mary Washington House was included. For the first time, the house was open to tours, first as a luncheon for the women of the association, and then later in the afternoon for such dignitaries as President Grover Cleveland. Black women, who they dubbed as aunties, showed dignitaries around, including President Grover Cleveland, and these unnamed women were the first slight interpreters of the Mary Washington House. The Mary Washington House officially opened as a museum on May 5th, 1900, and it has been primarily staffed by women since then. The early directors were called directoresses, and the early guides or site interpreters were called hostesses. The Mary Washington House has welcomed guests from around the world, though over time, it has had a checkered history, unfortunately. In the early 1900s, when it opened up, the guest books were segregated, and an early directress was forced to resign after being called out for segregating the tours. During the early decades of the museum, a popular event held every year was the reenactment of George Washington's final meeting with his mother. In 1955, Broadway actor Archie Smith wrote the script and performed as George Washington. He's a renowned actor. He passed away sadly in 2008, but his mother, Margaret Smith, was a custodian in the Mary Washington House from 1929 to 1965. I want to look up a little bit more about him because he was born in 1918. That makes he be 11 years old, so I bet he probably lived in the house for a while as a child. In 2013, the Washington Heritage Museum was formed and received the deed of gift from APVA for the Mary Washington House, the Rising Sun Tavern, and the Humorous Apothecary Shop. So this is Gail Braxton receiving the deed of gift in the Mary Washington House in the parlor with Mary's teapot watching over. 2 years ago, the Washington Heritage Museums received from the city of Fredericksburg the Mary Washington Monument. Today, the Washington Heritage Museums continues to hold events that link to the Mary Washington House and the monument. And this is from a couple of years ago where myself and Heather, where we were doing a Remembering Mary Washington event, and we were placing the wreath. So again, showing that the properties are still connected, and that it's very fitting that this is also a property that Mary Washington visited pretty regularly on the Kenmore estate. So thank you so much.
Next we have Allison Ellis of the George Washington Foundation.
Hello, my name is Allison Ellis. I'm the new Director of Education for the George Washington Foundation. I'm so excited to be talking about some of the ladies that founded our organization a little over 100 years ago. If you remember, if you're in the area, just about 3 years ago, we celebrated 100 years, our centennial of the foundation, originally named the Kenmore Association. So a lot of this information is pretty new, or pretty fresh in our minds. So it's really great to get to talk about it again today. So it's really hard for me not to talk about our 18th century history at both of our sites, but my story is going to pick up today a little bit after that. So we're going to start around 1920. On the screen is a photograph taken of Kenmore around 1920. So as you can see, she's not in the best of shape at this point. The back garden steps had completely deteriorated. Since the Lewises had sold the property off after Betty Washington Lewis's death, the house went through a lot of different ownership changes. There wasn't really one family that stayed in it for a long period of time and really took care of it. There were people along the way that took care of it, helped preserve the ceilings, which we're grateful for, but it was a field hospital during the Civil War. It was hit by cannon fire, and at this point, it was in pretty bad decay. And just not cared for like we care for it today. So in 1920, actually 1922, a group of local businessmen led by Peck Heflin, they decided to purchase the property for themselves, and the plan was to demolish it and create some new apartment buildings called Kenmore Court. And a group of local women said, that's not going to work for us. So some local women from Fredericksburg, led by Emily Fleming and her daughter Anne Fleming Smith, who we lovingly call Miss Annie today, got together and decided that they were going to save Kenmore. They formed a chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution called the Betty Washington Lewis chapter in hopes to be able to save Kenmore. So their first chapter meeting took place in Emily Fleming's home with about 15 people, 15 ladies that is, and they got together and they formed the Kenmore Committee. This committee talked with Peck Heflin about purchasing the property. He agreed with them on $30,000, which doesn't sound like a lot today, but that was a lot of money back then for them, with the first payment being due in September of 1922 of $10,000. So they had a lot of work ahead of them to be able to raise the funds to purchase Kenmore in time for him to sell it to them. Of course, he did provide the first $10,000 or $1,000 towards that $10,000 he gave to the Kenmore Committee, that first bit of money to kind of get them started. So they formed that DAR chapter, but they were still waiting on their official charter from the National DAR Association, and they couldn't wait any longer. Once they got that deal going with Peck Heflin, they decided that they weren't going to wait for their charter to come through, so they formed the Kenmore Association on April 17th of 1922, so they could devote their efforts completely to the fundraising efforts to help save Kenmore. Of course, their charter came through about 2 weeks later, on May 4th of 1922, but there was no time to waste. So they had formed the Kenmore Association, and they dedicated themselves completely to that fundraising effort in the summer of 1922. So they would do things like host gatherings on the lawn at Kenmore for local people. It was pounds of cake and gallons of tea, and they would host people on the lawn and say, look at this incredible piece of architecture, this piece of colonial American Revolution history. We have to save this piece of land, this piece of property. It is a part of our heritage, of our culture, and it has to be saved for Fredericksburg. They also went on a letter writing campaign. So they wrote dozens and dozens and dozens, hundreds of letters to women, to citizens across the United States to help with their fundraising effort. And there's an amazing quote in one of them that says, if in the event we do fail, all the money will be returned to you, but we will not fail. And I think that says a lot about what these women were doing, how they felt about Kenmore, and all the efforts they were willing to go through to save the property. So the money was raised. They made that first $10,000 payment in September of 1922 to Peck Heflin. with an additional $3,000 as well in September of 1922. So they were on the right track, but it did take them almost 2 or 3 extra years to raise the rest of the $30,000 to purchase Kenmore. But on January 1st of 1925, Emily Fleming made that final payment to Peg Heflin, and that is the photo that you see up top. They're in Kenmore's dining room, and she's handing over that final payment. So the Kenmore Association officially owned Kenmore and was able to save it from demolition. And on the bottom, Kenmore was officially dedicated as a shrine to the Daughters of the American Revolution on May 9th. This is an incredible photo. It's kind of a panoramic style, and there are hundreds of people that came out to this event. It is pretty incredible to think about this national landmark being dedicated and saved, and how many people came out to see it. So the ladies' work was not done at this point. You saw the picture. They had a lot of work to do to Kenmore to be able to make it a presentable place to become a museum. So they continued to raise funds to preserve the building, to furnish the building, and to keep the doors open as a museum, even through the Great Depression and World War II, which we know are just right around the corner from these dates. And of course, I can't talk about Kenmore without talking about Kenmore's gingerbread. A lot of people have really fond memories of going into Kenmore's kitchen and getting a slice of gingerbread from a lady dressed in colonial garb. I love the gingerbread. It is amazing. And I love to talk about it. So it's part of our history. I like to say that our organization was founded on a foundation of gingerbread, not literally, but figuratively. In the 1930s, the Dromedary Cake Mix Company was looking for a recipe for gingerbread that kind of embodied Americana and the American women. And the DAR chapter that helped preserve Kenmore, the Washington Lewis chapter, they had a cookbook that had Mary Washington's gingerbread recipe in it. And Annie Fleming Smith said this was a great opportunity for fundraising. And so that is exactly what she did. So they were able to strike a deal with the Dromedary Cake Mix Company. They loved the recipe. It worked out really well. So some of the proceeds that would be made from the sales of this mix around the country would go back to the Kenmore Association, and they were given as much mix as they could provide to serve in their kitchen. So every time somebody would come to Kenmore to take a tour, you would then be led into the kitchen and you would get a slice of gingerbread. It is a very nostalgic thing for a lot of people, and we have so many great photographs of the gingerbread being sold, especially during wartime. So in World War II, many soldiers would come to Kenmore on their days off, on their leave, and the ladies of the Kenmore Association would serve them tea and gingerbread. So we have a plethora of amazing photos from that time in our history.
Do you still get money?
The Dromedary Cake Mix Company went out of business, unfortunately, so we do not, but we do still have mixes for sale in our gift shop. And as a non-mixed person when I'm baking, I will say that that gingerbread mix is incredible. So I wanted to talk a little bit about our sister site, Ferry Farm. So in the 1990s, Ferry Farm was also under some threats. A lot of people in this room might remember it. Walmart actually wanted to develop on the Ferry Farm property. And the ladies, the gentlemen, the Kenmore Association, they said, no way, you cannot put a Walmart on George Washington's boyhood home's land. So obviously that house was not standing anymore, but we did know that this was where the house was. And so we had tons of protests. A lot of people remember the protests, a lot of people were there. We have employees that still work for the foundation that did participate in these protests. On the left is one of our leaders still to this day. Her name is Ceci Howell. She is speaking at a rally for Ferry Farm, and she's still very involved with our foundation today. So we were able to acquire Ferry Farm's property. The protests and the rallies all worked. So the Kenmore Association officially acquired Ferry Farm in the late 1990s, and then we changed our name to the George Washington Fredericksburg Foundation. Then was quickly changed to the George Washington Foundation because it was a bit too long. So today we have done archaeological excavations at Ferry Farm that are ongoing, but we have found the foundation of the Washington House and put it back on the landscape and recreated what the Washington House would have looked like. And then we have also reconstructed 2 outbuildings. So we're reconstructing not only the Washington's dwellings, but the dwellings and work buildings of the enslaved population as well. And we've also restored Kenmore to its 18th century appearance, and we continue to educate people about the men, women, and children living and working on both of our properties.
Thank you, Allison. Next, we have Heather Meadows of the James Monroe Museum.
I'm not sure if I can follow that, Allison, because she had her whole thing memorized. I'm going to read a little bit, so. All right, so this is the grave of Rose Gouverneur Hughes, who founded the James Monroe Museum. So situated in a small cemetery in Frederick County, Maryland, lay the remains of Mrs. Rose. Her middle name is Desheen Governor Hughes. So it literally means the Rose of China because she was born in China. Her father was in the Navy. So to passersby, her name might go unnoticed if you don't know who she is. Her gravestone really makes no reference to her direct descent from President James Monroe, which might entice more people to stop and wonder, who this woman was. So she was born in 1860 in Fuzhou, China, to Samuel Lawrence Gouverneur Jr. and Mrs. Marion Campbell Gouverneur. Her name means Rose of China, as I mentioned. She then married Captain Roswell Randall Hughes, a United States naval officer. So she did come from wealth and privilege. She was very much in an economic position her entire life to dedicate her time to philanthropic service. So this as a younger woman. And we had said, when we first started, or we first were doing this panel and Lindsay was organizing it, that the purpose of the panel was to highlight the remarkable women who have left an indelible mark on Fredericksburg's history. I think without the work of Mrs. Hughes, the story of James Monroe's time in Fredericksburg may have gone untold. So the museum, which houses the largest collection of Monroe artifacts, may not even exist without her. So oftentimes her son Lawrence is given a lot of the credit, and he did, of course, help found it, but also having now read more about her life and her, what she's done, I think Mama might have been given her baby boy a little bit more credit. So I understand that. I have a son, so probably would have done the same thing. But she stated in an article published by the Freelance Star on July 11, 1927, that the office will be fitted exclusively with the furniture and office equipment once owned and used by Monroe. And while it's probably that little of this was actually used by Monroe when he had an office here, he was here between 1786 and 1789, our family had long wanted to put the Monroe collection at some appropriate place as one of the moves to revive interest in the history of the country and the great men who led it through its earliest struggles. So this is Rose and Lawrence standing outside of the law office. And it was dedicated, it was originally called the James Monroe Shrine, and it was dedicated on April 28, 1928, the 170th anniversary of the birth of James Monroe. So on May 5th, 1928, newspaper The Peninsula Enterprise boasted in an article entitled "Speakers Extol Monroe Virtues at Dedication. Humble Law Office at Fredericksburg Becomes National Shrine." 30 descendants of James Monroe, representatives of the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th generations of the descendants of Thomas Jefferson, and a host of dignitaries holding high political and diplomatic offices, and several hundred Virginians from all walks of life and stations of life assembled at the courthouse in the afternoon. Rose's public service went beyond just the establishment of the James Monroe Museum. She was also a published author. Her book includes several editions of the costumes of the mistresses of the White House as shown at the National Museum. She wrote an essay on ancient maps embroidered by our great-grandmothers, the needlework of over 100 years ago, showing her early interest in fashion as a form of expression in history, with an opening commentary on the present state of women in the early 20th century. She writes, "During these busy 20th century days, when women are standing on the threshold of political enfranchisement and have recently been seen presiding at the great national conventions, as well as taking their places side by side with men in the history making of the day. It is decidedly interesting to go back to a primitive earlier era to appreciate the evolution of a woman. In looking through a vista of 100 years or more, to a casual observer, the transition has been steady but gradual, and a picture upon which we all love to dwell is the tradition of our great-grandmothers spinning, knitting, weaving, and making the daintiest needlework of embroidery. This was the period, too, when the old-fashioned housewife was willing to give unsparingly of her time and strength to the self-allotted tasks of the home, feeling assured of her reward in seeing some toothsome dish enjoyed by her family. Today, the American home has all changed. An up-to-date woman must belong to many clubs, perform active service on the boards of all philanthropic organizations she can carry, understand parliamentary law and the political situation of the day, and be ready as a speaker. In the rush and bustle of the active life, the fine art of needlework has been forgotten. But in the olden days, no young woman's education was regarded without certain domestic accomplishments, and in many families, specimens of the handiwork of our forebears are still preserved, the fineness and intricacy of which seemed almost impossible. That essay actually goes on to discuss the use of maps hidden in women's needlework, and this was a very long quote, but I included this because I think it can be seen as an observation, her observation of the state of affairs of women in the public sphere in the early 20th century. They're really at that time coming from the private sphere more into the public sphere. So Rose also wrote an account called Echoes from the Trenches of the Past as I Heard Them, based upon first-hand accounts of World War I soldiers who were wounded or made disabled during the war, by interviewing them, and she went around to a bunch of hospitals in the U.S. and interviewed these men. She also wrote an essay entitled The Colored Man as a Soldier. The Colored Man as a Soldier is a collection of quotes and stories involving men in the American Revolution, the War of 1812, the Civil War, and also the Battle of Santiago in Cuba. She writes, "It would require many pages to record what has been done by this race for the cause of liberty in the United States. Of the services and sufferings of the colored soldiers of the Revolution, very little has ever been recorded. But sufficient evidence is in existence to show that they bore their full share of the trials and sacrifices of that desperate fight for American independence." She then poses the question, how did the United States show its appreciation for the bravery of these colored troops? She answers her question. The answer is doubtful. Rose did more than leave an indelible mark on Fredericksburg history. She also served as a volunteer curator for the Smithsonian Museum of American History, which opened in 1912. She joined forces with another volunteer curator, Cassie Mason Myers Julian James, to begin a collection of the first exhibit of gowns worn by the First Lady. So if you've been in the Smithsonian, you've seen the collection of First Lady's inaugural dresses. She started that, so it's still in existence. So now when she started it, it wasn't all inaugural gowns. Some of it was just clothes from. Oh, thank you, Lindsay. Sorry. See, women can do anything, but this one can't push a button. All right, there she is. So she's the one on the bottom right-hand corner there. But thank you, Lindsay. So she basically, so the collection continues to grow now, but the gowns were traditionally donated by the First Ladies themselves, and most consisted of inaugural gowns. However, some of the original gowns procured by Mrs. Host and Mrs. Julian James also consisted of the non-inaugural clothes. Elizabeth Holmes, who was a former Wall Street Journal style editor, interviewed the curator Lisa Catherine Grady in 2023. Mrs. Holmes posed the question, how did the exhibition begin? She responded, "This is, by my count, about the 10th version of this exhibit to exist in 100 years. It went on display for the first time in 1914. The collection began in 1912 by the two volunteer women curators, who happened to be, and Mrs. Host happened to be a descendant of President James Monroe. So this actually, helped, of course, draw some attention to it. Originally, they were envisioning an exhibition of American costume, but the hook was born once she joined forces, the two ladies together, because they had access to clothing worn by Elizabeth Monroe and her daughter, since she was a descendant. So sometimes Maria, when Elizabeth was in ill health, would act for her mother as a first lady, basically. So they decided to put in some specialty cases highlighting the dresses of the mistresses of the White House. So the first exhibit was basically by women for women. And she published a book in 1925 entitled The Costumes of the Mistresses of the White House. You can still find this book. There are several editions of it, and she procured at least one dress from every First Lady up until that point. So from Martha Washington to Florence Harding. She had personal interactions with these women, including Mrs. Roosevelt, Mrs. Taft, and Mrs. Harding. And she had an account of these women, and they're all very different. So she said of Mrs. Roosevelt had been more or less impressed by the modesty of the American woman, but never more so than by the extreme delicacy of the feeling exhibited by Mrs. Theodore Roosevelt when she was requested to send a costume to the United States National Museum. She could not understand why the public was clamoring for the dress, and it was beyond her comprehension. Mrs. Taft, on the other hand, saw this as a great thing, and she immediately helped out and with the assembling of these costumes. So she would often come to look at them setting them up, and she would stand back and just say, "This is perfect." So I will tie this up because I know I've gone a little bit over, but I would like to say that her other interaction was with Mrs. Wilson, and she stated, "Facts as well as dates connected with the various dresses displayed are always obtained when possible for the museum archives as well as for the student of history in years to come, and it was thought within this view." So through her ancestry, connections to prominent families, politicians, philanthropists, and her dedicated interest to preserving the memory of President James Monroe, as well as championing the importance of an exhibit for the First Ladies of the United States, the first Smithsonian exhibit by women to women, and the work of Mrs. Rose Governor Hoos was not in vain, as both the James Monroe Museum and Smithsonian First Ladies collection endure and continue to grow both now and into the future. So, thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Our next presenter is Dr. Susan Martis of Belmont, Gary Melcher's home studio, where I am docent.
Thank you, Melina, and thank you, Lindsay, for organizing this group of speakers. So I'm talking to you today about Corinne Melchers and her gifts of creativity. We are highlighting right now at Gary Melcher's home and studio, it is 70 years since Corinne's gift of the estate to the Commonwealth of Virginia occurred. And when I say gifts of creativity in the title, I'm talking about both the vision to give a place where the public could experience art and nature and history and learn about her husband's artistic legacy, but we're also highlighting the talents that Corinne brought to the community through Belmont. So first, I'd like to introduce you to Corinne Melchers. She is standing here on the left, looking very happy at the top of the Horseshoe Staircase, a 19th century staircase that was part of Belmont when she and Gary Melchers bought it in 1916. But before I get that far, I just want to talk a little bit about Corinne Melchers. She was born in Baltimore. She lived for part of her childhood in Savannah, and then she returned to Baltimore to go to art school. So in 1902, she wanted to further her artistic studies by going to Europe. And we have sketches she made of historic sites. And her ultimate goal was to find an artist or a school of artists to study with in Europe. Well, on that ship, she met Gary Melchers. And she was thrilled. He was a well-known artist. She was very excited to meet him. By 1903, they were married. So he had already established a home and a studio in Holland, and so that's where she stayed. And eventually she followed him around Europe as he exhibited, as he created, had studios in other cities. But by 1915, they decided it's time to come back to the United States. Gary was from Detroit, and this is where their families were. Gary had a studio in New York City, but they really wanted a retreat, a place that was quiet, in nature. When they were in Holland, they were really living in a small village. Gary often painted the scenes of the village life, and they really worked hard to contribute to the community. And they did the same thing when they came to Falmouth, and I'm going to show some images of that in just a bit. But before I do, I want to talk a little bit about this painting by Gary. Gary in New York City was painting urban scenes, he was painting portraits of very well-known people,
But when he came back to Belmont, he often painted what was around him. So here we have a scene of Belmont looking up the hill, in the region of the corner of Ingleside Drive and Washington Streets. And we see daily life at Belmont. We see the animals, the farm animals that they added to this site, so you can kind of imagine the sound it made. We see Belmont with its windows open, which is something we can't do anymore because we're trying to protect the historic collection. But we also see urns filled with flowers. We see roses on the arbors of the Long Walk. And that leads me to one of the first talents I want to talk about with Corinne Melchers. In this photograph, it's a little hard to see, but look in the middle. You'll see a figure wearing a scarf around their neck and watering flowers. That's Corinne Melchers. Gardening was a big part of her life. When she and Gary purchased Belmont, Corinne was responsible for the renovation. They wanted to keep the historic aspects of the house, but for its modernization, for taking care of the animals. We have her garden plans. We have her instructions for how to prune fruit trees. She was an avid gardener. She was also a charter member of the Rappahannock Valley Garden Club. And I have a quote there that you can read for yourselves, but it talks about Belmont on Garden Day. And I'm really excited to say that Belmont is going to be part of Garden Day again this year. So we are keeping some of those traditions going. When the Melchers were in Europe, they were artists, they loved art, they amassed collections of paintings and prints and furniture and other forms of decorative arts. That's what you can see in Belmont today. We really try to keep the house to its 1920s appearance, how it looked when the Melchers lived there. And by taking all of this back from Europe and bringing it to Falmouth, they really expanded the range of art you can see here. Our collection spans centuries, different styles, different types. And it's also an example of how people lived with their collections. So it's just very interesting in that way. But moving to the couple as collectors to artists, I have some interesting images. I think it is less known that Corinne was an art student when she met Gary. And even in her journal entries and things like that after her marriage, she's living a very full and busy life. She doesn't talk about being an artist that much. But here are examples of her student work. And if you come to Gary Melcher's home and studio and you go into the galleries, you will even see sketches she made in Italy on that trip when she met Gary. They are very accomplished. And so we know that she must have kept up her skill, because look at the still life composition on the left side of the screen. It is quite skillfully done. And what we see here are flowers, likely from her garden. We see a vase that we still have in the house. And we see this wonderful coral necklace. That coral necklace to me means a lot, because when you look at a lot of the paintings Gary Melchers made of women from Holland, they are often wearing that coral necklace. So to me, it's a reference to his paintings as well. On the right side of the screen, you see a still life by Gary. It is one of many compositions like this that he did with different vessels that the flowers were in, different types of flowers, and likely these flowers came from Corinne's gardens. It is also likely that she was the one who created the arrangements that Gary then painted. So I feel like when you think about it that way, again, they're sharing their talents. Got another interesting comparison here, and that is two paintings of the couple painting each other. So on the left side of the screen, we have a painting by Corinne Melchers of Gary touching up a canvas. That's the only way I can explain why we see a frame on this painting, but Gary standing in front of it with his brushes and an easel. What's really marvelous is that there is a mirror on the back of the wall in this setting. So we see the front of the canvas that we can't see in the foreground, but we also see the model, and it's a Dutch model. The Melchers did go back to Holland to see family and friends, and both of them continued to paint while they were there. On the right side of the screen, we have a painting called Young Woman Sewing. And while it doesn't say so in the title, it is Corinne, and she is sitting in the parlor at Belmont, and she is sitting at a window that overlooks the hillside. She is doing needlework. She has a vase of flowers right there on the table. But through the window, we look down that hill towards Falmouth. And when you are seeing the painting in person, you can also just get a glimpse of some of the architectural highlights that are still in the region today. So finally, Corinne's goal, one of her big goals of giving Belmont to the Commonwealth was to sustain her husband's legacy. And here we have two images probably taken in or around Falmouth. There is a house up at the top of the painting on the left that looks very similar to a building that is now on the corner of Route 17 and Route 1. We have other paintings in the exhibition. You almost feel like you could walk down Washington Street today and still recognize these buildings. The other painting is a beautiful image of the Rappahannock River, and in Corinne's diary she mentions that she and Gary would go out rowing in the morning, and sometimes they take photographs. And so you know that was another source of his local inspiration. When the Melchers bought Belmont, they did make additions to the property, and an important one was Gary Melcher's studio and then the galleries that are adjacent. The window that you see in the building here is a north-facing window. That is what artists wanted, and we interpret that today as Gary's studio. It shows the range of subjects he painted and the styles he painted in. It also has his palettes, his brushes, even some old tubes of paint. So we really try to keep that feeling that Gary Melchers has just left. And then you're seeing a picture of the inside as well. I want to conclude this presentation with a quote, and I'm just going to read a couple highlights. This is by an art critic with whom the Melchers were friends. And he describes what it was like to be at Belmont with Gary and Corinne. He says, the flowers breathed of peace and truth and friendliness unquelled. What solvents our art and trust and humor and the joy of living. I like this quote because I think we strive today to make sure people still feel a sense of those qualities when they come to Belmont. I will tell you, you will meet wonderfully great staff, many of whom are here today, who will help make any visit to Belmont a magical experience. If you walk the trails, you can come for concerts, you can explore art and history, and when you do that, you are fulfilling the aims of Corinne Melchers in bequeathing Belmont to the community.
Susan, and our last presenter is Dr. Jayla Sims of Fredericksburg Area Museum, and she's here with us remotely.
Hi everybody, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. I'm so sorry I'm not there with you in person. I got sick last night. I have strep throat, and I mostly didn't want to make everyone in this room sick, but I was too devastated to miss this panel. So thank you for accommodating me, and sorry my face has been so gigantic this entire time. So I just wanted to say thank you to Lindsay for coming up with the idea for this panel and for bringing us all together. And of course, special thanks to Melena for moderating and making us all look smart. And thank you to Teresa Kramer, my beloved colleague from the Fredericksburg Area Museum, who lugged the TV in so that you can see my face today. So shout out to Teresa. As anybody who knows me knows, I am a girl's girl through and through. And so I'm very thrilled to be here today alongside this collection of brilliant museum women. We all know who run the world, as Beyonce says. So I would like to get down to business. I think I only have 10 minutes and I don't want Lindsay to yell at me. I'm very scared. Today I'm so honored to talk about three deeply important members of our Fredericksburg community, two of whom were supposed to attend tonight, but I don't think that they're in the room, which is good because it was too much pressure for me. The three that I'm talking about today are Ruth Coder Fitzgerald, Gay Todd Dagbalola, and Eunice Hagler. Each of these women have shaped the way history is preserved and remembered in this community, And they are the reason that I am here in this community today. Without them, there's no curator of African American history and special projects, and I don't ever take that for granted. So the first person I want to highlight is deeply important to me, though I never had the privilege of meeting her in person. Ruth Coder Fitzgerald. I'm hoping that her slide is showing on the screen.
Yes.
Yes, okay, cool. Oh, Miss Eunice is there. Hi, Miss Eunice. So, Miss Ruth Coder Fitzgerald received a degree in journalism from the University of Missouri-Columbia in 1966, and then after that, she and her husband, Barry Fitzgerald, served as Peace Corps volunteers in the Philippines, teaching elementary school and helping to start a community newspaper. And then after the Peace Corps, the two moved to Fredericksburg, where Mr. Fitzgerald worked as a photographer, primarily for the Freelance Star, and Mrs. Fitzgerald became active in various community organizations. So I call her Miss Ruth, even though I don't know her. But she wrote the only comprehensive book on African American history in the Fredericksburg area in 1979, the iconic story of Black history in Fredericksburg, Stafford, and Spotsylvania counties. So I only have one copy of this book, and I'm so scared of losing it because it's truly the basis of all of the work we've done here in Fredericksburg since my arrival in the city in 2022. Miss Ruth combed through dozens of archives to find every single mention of an African American associated with Fredericksburg, starting all the way at the early 17th century and ending in the 1960s with the Civil Rights Movement. She found every document, every newspaper article, every throwaway comment about this community, and documented them in her book, which remains the single most important record of Black history in this area. As a white woman, she advocated for Black history, Black stories, and Black activism, and actually included chapters toward the end of the book written by Dr. Philip Wyatt and Mrs. Gladys Bowles Todd, inviting local African American community members to speak for themselves in their own words, which I think is really beautiful. And it's a little bit less known, she also wrote an entire novel from the perspective of an African American girl, part of a free Black family living here in Fredericksburg in 1832. The book is called Rachel's Dream, A Young Girl's Quest for True Freedom, but it wasn't published during Mrs. Fitzgerald's lifetime. Instead, it remained in manuscript form until it was discovered by a Colonial Beach couple who called the brilliant Nancy Moore, who probably should have also been recognized in this panel, but we'll get to next time, Miss Nancy. Many people know Nancy Moore was a long-running editor of the Freelance Star and later managed the Central Rappahannock Regional Library's Virginiana Room. So Miss Nancy, along with several of her CRO colleagues, worked for several years to get the book published, and it's actually available today if you'd like to get a copy. It's a beautifully written story of a girl named Rachel, who, though free, is subject to the daily fear and strictures of the race-based antebellum Virginia hierarchy. My favorite parts of the novel are the clear influences of Miss Ruth's archival research, which manifests in references to slave coffles, the auction block, and the Underground Railroad here in Fredericksburg. I urge you all to pick up the book if you haven't already and maybe spend some time thinking about Mrs. Fitzgerald, to whom I owe the vast majority of my own foundational knowledge of our community's Black history. The second person I need to discuss today is Ms. Gay Todadek-Balola, one of my dearest friends. So Ms. Gay was gonna come tonight, but she texted me and said that her grandkids were in town, and so she was like, should I come to the talk or hang with the grandkids? And I was like, obviously hang out with babies, like, it's not even a question. But she knows deeply how much I love her. So, and also she doesn't need to hear me talk about her, I talk about her all the time. So, Ms. Gay was born and raised here in Fredericksburg and attended Walker Grant High School and later graduated as valedictorian in 1961. She was a leader in the Fredericksburg sit-in movement and later graduated from Boston University with a major in biology and minor in chemistry. While living in Harlem in the 1960s, she worked as a bacteriologist, became involved with the Black Power movement, and began using the surname Adek-Balola, which is roughly translated as reclaiming my crown, which a Yoruba priest gave her in 1968. She returned to Fredericksburg in 1970, where she joined the public school system as an 8th grade science teacher, and later developed the city's program for gifted and talented students. She worked with her father on Harambe 360 Experimental Theater and the Harambe 360 Black Arts Festivals. Later, she received her master's in education from Virginia State University, and in 1982, she was honored as Virginia's Teacher of the Year. Inspired by the blues women of the 1920s and the 1930s, the first Black feminists, Miss Gay has also built a career as a blues musician. She co-founded the trio Sapphire, the Upbeat Blues Women, in 1984, and left teaching in 1988 to become a full-time performer, touring nationally and internationally, and won the prestigious Blues Music Award for songwriting. She composes, sings, plays guitar, slide guitar, and harmonica. And through her music, she strives to empower people marginalized by society. So for the purposes of our panel today, I want to particularly emphasize Miss Gay's work as a contemporary griot, defined as a storyteller, historian, poet, and musician. As a griot, she brings history to life, delivering messages of empowerment, ministering to the heartbroken, and finding joy in the mundane. And she recently had me come over to her house so that she could play some of her favorite songs for me. And it's so clear through her music, the way that she combines history and storytelling. She is capturing these moments in time so that they are available to all of us in the future, but also showing how these kind of bigger moments are having an effect on her as a Black woman living in Virginia. I could literally talk about Miss Gay all day because I am obsessed with her, and she and her family are deeply important to me personally and to the work we do at the museum generally. As many of you might know, the Fredericksburg Area Museum will be opening a huge new exhibition in the next few months entitled Living Legacies, African American History in the Fredericksburg Area. This exhibition is dedicated to Miss Gay, our own living legacy. More than deserving. So the opening reception will be on Friday, May 30th, and it's literally going to be a celebration of Miss Gay, so please join us to celebrate her. And then next slide, please, Teresa. So the final person I'm going to highlight tonight is Miss Eunice Hagler, who's in the room with you, a wonderful person that I am very lucky I don't want to get her sick. Miss Eunice does so many important things in our community. She serves as a district liaison for Delegate Josh Cole, member of the Virginia House of Delegates. She is a tireless community advocate and founded an incredible series called The Color of History, which tours historical Black sites in the area. I would really recommend you all check it out. She has been to so many incredible places. And finally, the reason I wanted to talk about her specifically today, for the last decade, she has been responsible for organizing our regional Juneteenth celebrations. As she says, she's never had a budget for the events, but has called upon family members, friends, and community contacts to come together to honor the history of emancipation. Starting in 2015, her annual event has grown exponentially, bringing singers, dancers, poets, and comedians to perform, and always keeping a focus on the most important part of Juneteenth, in my opinion, the history. Last year, we were lucky enough to partner with Miss Eunice to bring her signature celebration to Market Square and had a phenomenal day of community, music, care, and history. We're thrilled to share that we'll be working with Miss Eunice again this year for her 10th anniversary. And we actually just found out we received a large grant to fund the event. So Miss Eunice, you have a budget now. So please, everyone, make sure you join us on June 19th to celebrate the history of Juneteenth, but most importantly, to celebrate Miss Eunice Hagler, who has done so much for our community and deserves every last bit of celebration. Again, I could talk about her all day long, but I'm going to leave it there. I'm also getting a little teary because I'm sick and confused, and I love Miss Eunice so much. All three of them are deeply important to preserving and celebrating the history in this area, and we're so lucky to have them. So thank you, Miss Eunice. Thank you, Miss Gay. I love you very, very much.
So now we're going to go ahead and head into the moderation portion of questions, and then we'll have a little bit of time at the end for questions from the audience. So, come on down, Ms. Molly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's give our presenters a hand. I have some questions for them, just a few. Why did you choose these women to be the subject of your Women's History Month? Anyone?
I'll go. So, can you hear me? Okay. The short answer for me was Lindsay asked me to. She's our programs coordinator. Typically, she would be doing this presentation, but she also knows I like to research a lot, and it's something that I miss a lot. So I knew nothing about this woman. I mean, I knew she existed, but Lawrence is very much given a lot of the credit for the founding of the museum, and he did help. But just learning about her and her other accomplishments, and not only the impact she had on Fredericksburg, but also at the national level with the Smithsonian, and some of her writing that did these essays. And I know I went over tonight, and I apologize, Lindsay, but I mean I could have gone double with the amount of writing that she did, and these essays, and she's been published, and she wrote some beautiful poetry. I mean, she was definitely a wonderful poet as well. So to me, it was just a chance to learn about a woman that I really did not know a whole lot about. And that's unfortunate considering that, I work for the museum. I have not spent a whole lot of time focusing on her. I'm glad for the opportunity to learn more about her.
And I'll just ask one more question so our audience will have a chance to ask questions. How can our audience members help you honor these women who have done so much to preserve our community's history and historic sites?
This is the sites.
This is the sites. Come in and visit and learn and join our organizations, attend our events. Just being here helps.
Can I answer too?
Yes.
Yes, I think showing up to support is so helpful. But also telling people how much they mean while they're still here is very important to me. I know there are other panelists, the people that they were talking about are gone, and I hope that they were given their flowers when they were here. But the people that I talked about besides Ms. Bruce, they're here now, and they deserve all of the care and love that we can give them right now. And there's so many other women in our community who have done amazing work, continue to do amazing work to take care of us, take care of our history and our stories. So tell them now. Everybody who knows me knows I tell them now. But I invite everybody else to gush over these women too, because they really deserve it.
Thank you.
Who or what was a strong influence on their lives?
I can answer that. For the Kenmore Association, obviously in the 1920s, women had just got the right to vote. So being involved in preserving a historic site was something that women were able to do at that time, and I think a lot of that was influenced by the Mount Vernon Ladies Association, especially in the case of the Kenmore Association. Those women really set the standard for historic preservation and preserving colonial American history. So I think the DAR and the Kenmore Association took a lot of influence from the Mount Vernon Ladies Association and what they did in the 19th century, and really brought it to Fredericksburg to preserve Kenmore and all the important history that goes along with it.
Yeah, I'd like to step into here too. Can you hear me? Okay. How's that? Okay, great. As we were thinking about this, and I was thinking about this exhibition, I realized that so much of what these women have done is often behind the scenes. And when I think about how they valued nature, I'm thinking of the Melchers, and they valued their animals, and they really valued the people in their lives. There are just copious letters to the people who they knew, and they were also important in their communities. Belmont wasn't the only historic site that the Melchers were involved with to help found. They were involved, Corinne especially, when the 1942 flood happened. There are just so many stories that are still out there, and I think important. And I think, some of those same things would matter to them today, taking care of the world around us and the people around us.
And one more, what were some of the first that these women implemented in society? What social changes did they bring about?
Kayla.
Sorry, I can't see everybody, so I just want to make sure I'm not like interrupting. I just want to highlight Miss Ruth Coder Fitzgerald and Mrs. Ruth Coder Fitzgerald again, because in 1979 she put together the most comprehensive Black history book of Fredericksburg. I mean, it sounds so basic now, but the work that she did, the archives she combed without a computer, with no digital databases, she had to physically go to all of these archives. The amount of work she did is truly stunning. And that book, A Different Story, I truly look at it almost every day, because I'll be like, oh, that's right, Miss Ruth talked about this. I can find the answer. She was the first to do it, and as of right now, the only one, although some of you might know that I'm working on a follow-up for her, but it won't be as good as hers, because hers is an original. And there are just so many stories in there that people maybe don't know super well, some that people know quite well, but it's just incredible that she was able to do that work and able to pour that much into it. And again, also, go to that many archives, because y'all who do archival work know that's a lot of effort. And she must have gone to, I can't even count how many she did. So if you ever want to come by the museum and look at my copy, you can't take it, but you can.
Does anyone want to follow up with anything? Okay.
Okay, we'll open it up to the audience. If you have any questions, come up and
Come to the podium if you have a question, or we can come to you.
Well, I can talk about
Okay.
it. It's Gary Melcher's museum. It was, part of it was closed because of mold or something. Is it open now, the rest of it?
The museum?
Melcher's, where
It's
the
open.
paintings are at Melcher's.
Oh, yeah. It's open. The house is open, the galleries are open,
Okay.
the trails, it's going to be in full bloom soon, so.
And you have, okay, one more thing. You have 4 concerts, May through August. They are free concerts there.
They
where
are
people
free
can-
concerts
where you
called
can
Art
look at the
After
paintings.
Hours.
You can look at the paintings in his.
Yes, we do open the galleries for a short time during those concerts. Thanks for that question.
Have you named the bands that were going to be there?
I cannot remember. Yeah, I think we need a different resource for that.
I have a question, if that's okay. Hearing you all work on this for the last 3 months and talking about how important the stories were, what parts of your research really moved you? I know we all had a moment, right, where you look at something and it almost has you in tears almost, or just with joy. What are some moments for you that you just feel a growing joy or just emotion in general about that sticks out to you?
I'll go with for me, it was her interaction that she had with the World War I soldiers. I didn't know that about her. The fact that she went around and interviewed all these men that had been injured or disabled. Also, her essay on the role of black men in the armed forces and how they had not been given credit for their service as much as others. That I don't know if you saw that really moved me. And the fact that she was doing that in the 1920s as a white woman, I find to be slightly pretty progressive for her time period. I really enjoyed that essay. There was so much to her that I just had no idea. I think for me, it was just seeing the way that, she talked about being in the public sphere now and how you have to be ready for everything as a woman and be involved in all this, but the fact that she's still acknowledging the contributions of these men. As a woman, she's not just, just women. I mean, the fact that she's involving the men, I think, was very important to me.
For me, it was knowing that the first tour guides at the Mary Washington House were African American women, and that these women were not given their credit. They're just listed as aunties, that they were the first ones. Without them, I wouldn't have a job. I mean, I started as a tour guide, so these were the first women who were giving tours at this location.
Denise, you have a question?
Not a question, but an answer to a question earlier. I'm the event manager here at Office Home Studio.
That question.
Publication here. On May the 22nd, Mark Fredericksburg's band will be performing. The rain date is a week later, May 29th. On June the 5th, the Fredericksburg Concert Band will be performing, and the rain date is June 12th.
Now, what did you say? Well, I had on here May 8th.
It's May 22nd is the first, is Mark Frederick. And then on July the 10th is Bolt Riders Surf Rock Band. Isn't that so exciting?
July, what was that, July what?
July 10th.
What, okay, and what's the name of the band?
Bolt Riders Surf Rock Band.
Okay.
And then the last one in August, on August 7th, is the Hazel Run Band. And the rain date is, all of these performances are a week later for the rain date, which will be August 15th. I can give it to you again online too, if you want to put it in your calendar.
Are they on a website?
Yes, they're on our website, and we publicize it. Perfect. They're not on there. They're not on there yet, but it's.
But they will.
Yes.
Yeah, because the flyer just listed the dates, but one of those dates was wrong, but it didn't list what bands would be there.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Fair to say, Allison, you're talking about what historic museums and establishments like Kenmore do we have that we really can thank the women of Fredericksburg back in their day for their existence today? It sounds like Kenmore.
Yeah, Kenmore, and then Ferry Farm is an offshoot of
Ferry
Kenmore.
Farm
So.
I will jump in that Gayla wanted to answer the question I asked previously, since she's virtual, we're working together here, about like a moment that made her emotional. Gayla, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to derail.
You're fine.
But I wanted to just highlight something that Michelle said. You know, she talked about how the early guest books were segregated from the Mary Washington House, not to bring down the mood, but I talked to Michelle about this separately in a different time, and learning that hit me really, really hard. For many reasons, but mostly because, as anybody who's ever met me knows, I love museums with my whole entire heart. And so the fact that there are Black folks who wanted to come to the Mary Washington House, wanted to honor her, but were treated like that without the care that they deserved was really painful for me, but also the fact that Michelle and her colleagues were willing to reckon with that history, not hide it, share it with us, shows me that there's, I mean, the people who work in museums in Fredericksburg are very special. So Michelle, I just wanted to say thank you for bringing that up. But also I want everyone in the audience to remember, I want everyone in the audience to remember though, that museums have not always been as hospitable to all communities as they could be. And so the work that we're doing together today is very important and honors those people from the past. So thank you, Lindsay, for that question. I'm sorry for derailing, but I really wanted to highlight how great that is that Michelle brought that up.
Do we have any more questions?
Oh, yes.
Further, come around, yeah.
I'm John White, and I have personal knowledge of Hugh Mercer's Apothecary Shop, Kenmore, and Belmont. My mother cooked the gingerbread and was a maid at Kenmore. I cleaned Hugh Mercer's Apothecary Shop back in the 50s. I was about 14, 15 years old, and I did that. At Belmont, my girlfriend, her name was Vivian Roots, but her family grew up on Belmont in a little house that you may know it as the Fanny Roots house. So I was wondering if you mentioned, found anything on any of those women, people. Fanny Roots.
Yeah, oh, I'm sorry. Are you asking if we've found research about her?
Yeah.
Yes,
Claudia
I mean,
White.
I'm sorry, say again?
Claudia White.
Claudia White.
Millie.
I will look that name up.
Millie, I don't remember Millie's last name, but she also made gingerbread at Kenmore. And Sam Samuels was the gardener there.
I will watch for those names, thank you.
In the
Thank you. Anyone else?
Probably more of a suggestion more than anything. Have you guys thought about doing an actual anthology based off of this panel? Because I think that would be really important for people that not only visit, but for women that have been born in Fredericksburg, that have been raised in Fredericksburg, to know our history the way we should know it.
Well, Melena and Michelle, you guys are the authors, so maybe you can collaborate.
I mean, totally, like, there's so much on just the founding of the Mary Washington Monument and the DER, and how many prominent women, like, we got Mrs. Garfield, we have Mrs. Hurst, who was William Radford Hurst's mother involved. She was a founder of the PTA. There's women all across the country who were involved, who may not come here, but they helped. And also learning more about the other stories of all the other organizations.
No pressure, guys.
Yeah.
I think that's an important point, right?
Yeah.
I think that would be something great that we didn't even consider. And I mean, it would be up to them and I would help. But something to consider, especially with the other people and names that were brought up that we didn't get to research yet that we could look into. We have time for one more question. Sorry, the library closes at 8, so. Or I could stay here all night with these lovely ladies. Okay, well, you know, this idea formed, I was at lunch with Jenna one day, my public programs coordinator assistant, she's over there, leave Jenna. And she brought up, she's like, we really should talk about Rose and the importance that she had in the America's First Ladies exhibit. And I'm like, you know, that's a great idea. What if, and we were just talking at Agora, and I was like, what if we just did all of them? And working with all of the museums in town is just emotional for me because we all bring something to the table, and getting to work with such lovely ladies who have such an impact on telling stories and sharing these stories of all these people who, you know, preserve the streets that we walk was really important. So I just want to thank everyone, and Melena Henderson again for moderating this, for someone who works in so many of these institutions. Thank you to Michelle, Allison, Heather, and Susan for just such a lovely lecture. And thank you all for being here because this information is very important. And I hope you all have a lovely night.